All right, well, welcome everybody to the Howard Show. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. It truly is an honor. I'm excited about doing this because this is the first episode I've done with another former operator.
Yeah.
And it's something I've been wanting to do. I've been wanting to get the guys on and guys like you have incredible stories. A lot of y'all were in since like the initial invasion. And I kind of want to get these stories out. But also you've had just such great success, not only in the military, but outside the military, especially with what you're doing with Surf Brigade. As you can tell, I'm a big fan. Hat, shirt, got the stickers on here, and we surfed this morning.
That's right.
I know we're both very passionate about taking care of the vets and
right.
the mental health, and I think Surf Brigade's probably one of the best ways to do that. Because I like what you told me. You said, if I asked you to come, like, just stand in the water with me and have a conversation or do therapy, most guys probably aren't going to do it.
Yep.
But if I ask you to come surfing with me, you're going to be doing therapy and not even realizing
That's
it.
right.
So it's really good. But I kind of want to give an introduction to you. You sent me over a lot of your stuff. Actually, before I get into the introduction, I always like to tell people a little bit about how I have the connection with who's on the show.
Yeah.
So I met you in 2000, I think it was 11. You were my instructor at Advanced Skills Training. Weren't very nice back then. I actually had a lot of FaceTime with you because I was the team sergeant for my team going through. Right. So I was always in your office for something, or getting critiqued on everything. But it was great training. Learned a lot because I think you were probably pretty fresh out of your team around that time, and you just had so much knowledge, especially on the reconnaissance part of what we were training.
Yeah.
And then we always just kind of bumped into each other a little bit here and there. And then after you retired from the military, lived right down the road from me. So it worked out really good. But we got 23 years active duty, started as an E1, went all the way to E9, 9 deployments, 4 to Iraq, 4 to Afghanistan, 1 to AFRICOM, EUROCOM, AFRICOM. We got Bronze Star Medal with Valor, 4 ARCOMs with Valor, bunch of high-level awards, Meritorious Service Medal, 3 of those. And besides, Jump Master Free Fall. What is ABN? I don't even know what that is.
Airborne.
Oh, airborne. Jump Master for airborne and free fall.
Yeah.
Ranger. You were attached to the Ranger. I think you actually told me today you did 3 battalion deployments and then 3 recce Ranger deployments.
Yep, that's right.
And then you were selected as the first group of chiefs to leave the Air Force to stand up the Space Force. If I got that right.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and then we'll get into all the businesses you got later on, but you got 4 businesses, you've got books you've authored.
Yep.
You don't sit around. Like you definitely get after it. So why don't you tell a little bit about where you're from, how you grew up, and what led you to join the military and go be a SOF TACP?
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for having me here, first of all, of course. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. Talk about Surf Brigade as well, and wherever else this goes. So I grew up in New Jersey, suburban New Jersey, right outside of New York, I was mentioning before. I almost enlisted in the Army when I was 17 because I wanted to get out of the house. I wanted to leave New Jersey, and that was kind of my ticket. And so luckily, though, my parents talked me off the ledge and said, if you really want to join the military, let's focus on getting a good ASVAB score and not just taking the first train out of town, and talk to all the services and see what's right for you. And so through that process, I chose the Air Force and went on to join. I first came in as air transportation I'm dating myself here, 1998.
Oh.
And my first 2 bases in hindsight, which were fantastic. And I recommend to young folks in the military, if you can pursue an overseas assignment right off the bat, do it, because it will develop you as an adult at a young age so much faster than being somewhere in the States. But my first base was Japan for 2 years, and then I went right to Korea for a year, and I loved both of those assignments. Tried to go back again. I never could get back. But I was in Korea on 9/11. And I was also in my cross-training window at that time as well. And so it was pretty clear to everyone that we were going to go to war after 9/11. And so I cross-trained to TACP. I did not have a lot of mentorship in the community of the Air Force that I was in on what my options were. And so I didn't probably have a full picture on all of the combat career fields in the Air Force that were available. But I did have one supervisor who knew what TACP was. And that's basically how I went down the TACP path. And so I went cross-trained, and my first TACP base was Fort Benning. And I got there, moving forward a little bit, right before the invasion of Iraq. And so my timing was right, because I was a brand new TACP, showed up to Fort Benning, and 3rd Infantry Division deployed to Kuwait to invade Iraq, to include me. And so I was brand new, not even JTAC qualified yet, and did the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, wow, which was like my christening into the TACP career field. And it was great. And the real benefit of being at Fort Benning, when I got back from that, you know, I graduated tech school and deployed like a month later. The benefit of that when I got back is I was already a combat TACP with very little time in the career field, so I had some credibility. But being at Fort Benning, as you know, which is the home of Army TRADOC, there's so much training that goes on there. And so over the next few years, I was able to go to airborne school, and because they're all on post, you can walk onto these schools. Pathfinder school, eventually Ranger school as well. And by doing that, made myself more competitive to go over and support the Ranger Regiment, which is also at Fort Benning. Now it's a significantly different process, but back then in the early 2000s, there was not a formal process of finding yourself aligned to that organization.
Oh, so they didn't have like this, was it the 17th? Was that there at the time?
The 17th ASOS was there, okay, which is what I was in. Now it's the 17th STS. By the time that you and I had met, there was a more formal process of assessing to go into that unit. But before that, there really wasn't an assessment. And so they would look at your records, they would look at your training and determine if they thought you were going to be a good fit for that organization. It was not perfect. And there were times where you had guys on the team that you found out later at an unideal moment that they shouldn't be there. But the assessment processes have gotten significantly better. And so that risk is almost non-existent now, which is very good. And now the 17th is aligned under Tier 1 organizations, and so it's even different than when I was there. But bringing it back around, I did then do 3 years and 3 deployments with 3rd Ranger Battalion out of Fort Benning, which was awesome. That was really the highlight of my kind of combat time, fighting, gunfights, JTAC, bomb dropping. And then after those 3 years, I transitioned over to the Regimental Reconnaissance Company and did 3 more years and 3 more deployments doing reconnaissance work for them, which is also great, but it's a significantly different mission. After those is when I came out of the 17th and came down to Hurlburt for the first time as an instructor, which is where we met. So when we met, I had just finished, you know, this ties into Surf Brigade in a lot of ways as well. I had just finished 7 combat deployments in 7 years. I was deployed for 4 to 6 months of every one of those years. And you remember your team days too. When I was home, 75% of my home time, I was TDY for training as well. And so I basically had no control over my life for 7 years. But it was all for a higher purpose, which kept me moving in the right direction. But when I finally came down to Hurlburt, everybody always thinks, man, I've got that staff job coming, or I've got that instructor position coming. That's when things are going to get good. But it doesn't always happen that way, And for me personally, in hindsight now, years later, when I finally came off the line, I was going through a lot of probably rapid decompression from 7 deployments in 7 years with basically no mentorship, and was not fully able to realize how I was most effective in the military. And so I had a lot of stray voltage going in different directions, and probably a lot of students were on the receiving end of some of that energy that probably could have been focused a little better and been used more effectively.
So how was that going, the initial invasion? I mean, that must have been just, you were 21, 20?
I was 23.
23?
Then, yeah.
I mean, that must have been kind of like exciting to be like the first push in. And you're going in with like armored cavalry?
Yeah.
Armored vehicles?
Mechanized.
Mechanized?
So I was with 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, which used to be on Fort Benning. It's on Fort Stewart now. But that was soft skin. I mean, now you couldn't dream of doing that. But I was 23 years old. Thought I had everything figured out. And now, of course, I'm 43, and I'm like, man, I was still a kid then, But soft skin Humvees driving from Kuwait, we went west and the Marines went east, and we met in Baghdad. Not great equipment, sir. And I was not in special operations then, and it was very evident. And so, we were putting sandbags on the floor of our Humvees because we thought we were going to hit IEDs and they were going to come through the floor, finding old flak jackets and putting them on the soft doors of our Humvee in case we were taking fire, and just doing everything you could to improve what you had, and that doesn't stop. Even when you're in special operations, you're always improving your foxhole. That's just the nature of what we do. Even now in business, we're always making improvements every day. Even when you think everything's good, it's not. There's always a way that you could improve it to make it better, and that's a matter of readiness as well. But that was an exciting time, I mean, whether it was driving literally through the wide open deserts of Southwest Iraq where you can't see anything in any horizon to horizon, it's just deserts, and then actually getting into the suburban areas of Iraq and the airfields and the initial invasion and the ground combat that was happening there as well. That was a very formative experience. It was much different going back there. I did several more deployments in Iraq later with the Rangers, but those deployments, the bases had been established. We were deploying into those bases and running combat missions out of those bases. But during the initial invasion, there were no bases. You would drive, and when we would rest overnight or rest over day to refuel the vehicles and do maintenance on the vehicles, like, you were literally setting out perimeter security and roving guards because you were in the middle of a foreign country and they didn't want us there.
Yeah, and just circle the wagons.
That's exactly right.
That's wild. No, that must have been definitely an experience, especially for a first deployment.
Yeah.
So at that time, you were like attached, like with a JTAC. You were kind of assisting him.
Oh, I'm
so
ROMAD.
ROMAD. So you got to see him, like, kind of learn the process and drop. Was he pretty busy dropping? Were they doing a lot of dropping?
We were at like the brigade headquarters, so it was a lot more deconfliction for the guys that were at the battalions that were doing dropping. But for me, how it served me throughout my career later best during that time was I was the young it was ETAC back then too, by the way. I was a non-ETAC qualified TACP, which meant you were basically useless. But my nature is to make myself useful wherever I go, whatever I do. And so I became a communications expert as absolutely fast as possible. every radio, Army or Air Force, that was in any of the vehicles that we were using. I learned in a short amount of time how to cable, decable, troubleshoot, make everything talk when it didn't want to. And so that later throughout the rest of my career would prove really useful because I was a communication expert above what was probably necessary as a JTAC, because I would nerd it out on comms when I was in that environment. But it also meant I was at the brigade level, basically watching, not basically, watching a war be orchestrated and deconflicted at the brigade level. And so the visibility that created for me would carry with me the rest of my career as well. And, I went on years later as an EA and E9 to go to Joint Forces Staff College and places like that, which was really a remarkable experience. But that's very strategic level joint planning. I probably couldn't appreciate it at 23 years old, what I was seeing happen in front of me. But when I got to the back half of my career, I had those experiences that I could finally unpack in more strategic ways and appreciate them more.
Mm-hmm. How long was that deployment?
I think that was probably 4 months ish.
Okay.
We lived in the desert of Kuwait for a couple of weeks in fobs, literally just sleeping in tents in the shitty desert of Kuwait. I mean, it was terrible. And then in March of 2003, actually crossed the berm into Iraq. And I think we did a couple of months in Iraq, and then they brought in replacements, and we all flew back to Kuwait, did some inventories, and then came home.
Wow. So did you get exposed to the Rangers at all during that time frame? Like seeing their missions? Is that what got you excited maybe? Or is that what kind of led the path eventually to go to
I don't think I saw them in Iraq on the initial invasion, but because we're at Fort Benning, it was I've always been very motivated, and I've always looked for opportunity to self-improve. Mm-hmm. And it was very evident when I got back, because I graduated tech school, and like a month later, I deployed to Kuwait. So I wasn't sitting around Fort Benning, seeing what was going on. But when we got back from the initial invasion is when I could kind of look at all of the operators on Fort Benning, and you realize real quick, like, who's a conventional guy and who's a special operations guy. And all the guys that were attached to the Ranger Battalion, the training that they were doing was so significantly different than the TACPs assigned to 3rd Infantry Division. I just started asking, like, how do I do that? That's what I want to do. And those guys who were basically my same age were telling me, like, go to Ranger School, dude. Go to Airborne School. Go to Pathfinder. You need to set yourself apart from your peers. And so I just started volunteering for absolutely everything. And just like communications as a non-qualified ETAC, like, I was trying to make myself useful to those guys. So if those guys were going out to train, I would ask them, like, take me out training with you. I don't, if you're going to the shooting range today, even if I don't get to shoot, I'll come out and load magazines so you guys can shoot. I just wanted to be in that environment and prove my worth to them in the hopes that it would make me competitive to transition over that side of the house, which eventually it did.
Yeah. When did you go to Ranger School? Was it after that deployment, or?
I did it. I actually did 3 deployments with the Ranger Battalion before I went to Ranger School.
Oh, wow.
And so I had the majority of my combat experience, like direct combat experience, had probably already occurred in those. My 2nd, 3rd, and 4th deployments were with the Ranger Battalion, and those were good and exciting in good ways now, deployments. And then I went to Ranger School. When I graduated Ranger School, then I went over to do reconnaissance for 3 years thereafter.
Mainly just doing a lot of direct action, supporting.
Yeah, those 3 years with 3rd Ranger Battalion was all direct action, and we, the summer of 05 and the summer of 06, we were deployed. I was with 3rd Bat. We were deployed to Al-Anbar province in Ramadi, which was the hot spot in Iraq at the time. The Marines had just had Fallujah in '04. That was their major battle. And they pushed all of Al-Qaeda into Ramadi in '05 and '06. And they went mostly untouched and uncontested for a pretty significant amount of time, which allowed them to build up, which could not be allowed. And so the Joint Task Force sent a presence into Ramadi first in the summer of '05, which included the Rangers. And then we started running operations for the next 2 summers all across Ramadi and basically expelling Al-Qaeda from that entire area.
Wow. A lot of dropping during that time.
Yeah, it was awesome.
How many bombs do you think you dropped in that deployment?
'05 and '06. I probably should go back and count. What I'll tell you, and by then it was JTAC, and by then, because it was JTAC, the other services had JTACs also, and so we had Ranger JTACs and Air Force JTACs. We were running so many missions and dropping so many bombs that I could not keep up with the requirements, and so we had Army JTACs that were going out on missions with us because the Joint Task Force, we would launch out in Strikers on daytime missions.
Oh, wow.
And get into so many simultaneous gunfights, and everybody wanted to drop CAS, and everybody had the ability to drop CAS, and it was justified. But there was only one JTAC on the ground, and you just very simply could not employ that many aircraft simultaneously. And so we started splitting Army JTAC and me in different locations, and even with the two of us, we couldn't keep up with the demand. So they brought in other Air Force JTACs, and we were basically putting JTACs down to the Ranger platoon level. And when we would go out on missions, we would assume and expect that every individual platoon is going to get into a gunfight and everyone would be dropping. The cool part about that is, from a JTAC perspective, we would spend time together, just the JTACs, planning separately than everyone else. And we reached a point, I still talk to these guys today too, and we talk about this stuff. We reached a point where we realized we had to speed up the 9-line process. And so there were 600 numbered buildings in Ramadi. Intel had numbered 600 buildings. We built a book of 600 9-lines, and the target coordinates were the building. And we would send that PDF to every aircraft in Iraq that was flying in support of the Joint Task Force. So if any time anybody wanted to drop a building, they could very simply give us the building number, and we could reference that in our 9-line book, and it would speed the entire process up. But making 600 9-lines took a significant amount of time. But we had, JTACs who were sitting around nerding out, making all of these 9-lines in advance, but it allowed us to prosecute targets that much faster. The exact number of bombs, I have no idea, probably dozens of targets. Mm-hmm. And probably every type of munition and every aircraft that was flying at that time. So fast movers, helicopters, bombs, guns, rockets. We were shooting all of them, which is fantastic, and we needed to. But we learned a lot of lessons really fast, and we got good and better. Back then, there were times where, a lot of bombs that you drop, it's to nobody's fault, are duds. And it's not what you want, and you never know. You assume that every bomb is always going to go off, but if you're in the middle of a gunfight and you deploy a dud, it's not really helpful, Excuse me. It can even make the situation worse, right? Separate deployment in Afghanistan one time, we were dropping on a group of individuals, armed combatants, that were on our HLZ, basically set in an ambush, and we could not land our helicopters on the HLZ because they had set in an ambush on the HLZ. And so we had approval to eliminate all of them and try not to foul the HLZ so that we could bring in the helicopters and go home. And, important lesson for me as a young JTAC then, and you've heard this too, always pick the effect, not the munition. Let the pilots pick the munition. But I knew they had Mark 82 airburst, and I had never dropped one before, and so I just got excited and thought, this is the perfect munition. I'm going to drop a 500-pound bomb with an airburst munition, and it's going to eliminate every person on the HLZ without fouling it. They had no idea that it was coming. And so the aircraft agreed, and they did it. And, I could even hear it whistling in, and it landed right in the middle of the HLZ and was a total dud.
Oh.
And so instantaneously, everyone on the HLZ knows, they know we're here, and we know that they're trying to eliminate us. And so they scattered, which made the problem significantly worse because now we had to account for every single individual. And in that particular mission, luckily for us, those guys, which is not a good idea, they formed up into a single posse, probably to figure out what they were going to do next. And we were able to re-attack then with the more appropriate munition and eliminate the threat. But lots of lessons, lots of bombs dropped, lots of lessons learned in a short amount of time, literally in combat under fire. You learn things faster in that environment because you have a literal life or death incentive to be better at it. You come off of targets and we're going back out tomorrow and we're going to get into gunfights tomorrow. We have to be better tomorrow than we were today if we want to keep bringing everyone home. And so you do things like get the JTACs together and stay awake for 12 hours, making 609 lines. So when you launch on the next target, you're ready.
Yeah. See, I'm glad you kind of explained that a lot that way, because I don't think a lot of people don't understand exactly what a JTAC does, a controller or a TACP. When I try to explain it to them, they initially think like, oh, you fly a drone or you're sitting behind a computer screen doing bomb dropping. And they don't actually understand, like you said, you're right there in the middle of the gunfight.
Yeah.
I mean, you are with the team. You're taking fire like everybody else is. And then you still have to get your head up, calling a 9-line, drop. Like it's not behind a computer screen. It's not sitting up on a little mountaintop while the team is going down. Like you're right there with that team.
Yep.
Everywhere you go.
There are some guys that serve in those capacities, but that's really where the difference between conventional forces and special operations exists. And for JTACs, for operators in general, it doesn't matter if you're a JTAC or you're a Navy SEAL or, as you know, when you're younger, especially for enlisted in your tactical prime, you're much more likely to find yourself on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
Later in your career, just by nature of getting promoted and serving in higher levels of responsibility, you'll typically come off of the line. My timing, your timing when you were an operator as well, was good for us from a formidable perspective as individuals and NCOs and operators and now businessmen also, because we had the opportunity to deploy to combat when we were in our tactical prime. It's different now. It's challenging now because there are a lot of really great Americans and operators that go through very difficult training and they show up to their first units and they want the experience that we had, but it's not there waiting for them. Mm-hmm. They want to be the 23-year-old guy who shows up to a unit and a month later they're invading a foreign country, but it's just not there for them now. It doesn't mean they're not great people or great operators. It's just not there for them. But being able to do that at such a young age is so incredibly formidable, and it pays dividends for the rest of our lives, truthfully.
When you were JTACing with the Rangers, were you like an E5 at this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was an E5 while I was in the Ranger Battalion for those 3 years. I want to comment on that. And then I was an E6 when I was with Recce. When I was at the Ranger Battalion, I tested for Tech Sergeant 2 times. And I had a great supervisor who I still talk to all the time, who came in, and all of the E5s that were E5 TACPs that were assigned to Ranger Battalion, we had convinced ourselves that if we made E6, they were going to give us assignments and PCS us away from Fort Benning. And we wanted to keep fighting. And so we made a pact for 2 years in a row to throw the test, and nobody would get promoted. And so we did. All of us, we would have to go TDY back to the Air Force Base to test, and we would all show up, and they give you like 2 hours to take the promotion test. We would take it in like 7 minutes and then get in the GOV and all drive back to Fort Benning together. And on the third year, our supervisor, who was a master sergeant at the time, came in and he said, how are you guys the most motivated guys in the career field, the most combat experienced TACPs in the career field right now, the smartest guy? I can give you a piece of equipment and you guys reverse engineer this thing in 24 hours. I can put you into Ramadi and you figure out how to write 9 lines for 600 buildings overnight, but none of you are getting promoted? What is going on? And we told him, well, if we get promoted, we're all going to get assignments out of here. And he said, that's not going to happen, okay? I promise you. And the very next year, all of us got promoted. I mean, sweeping promotions for everyone. And then from there, it was like E7 first time, E8 first time, E9, and it just went on and on and on. But that was, in hindsight, probably not a very smart thing to do.
A lot of guys are that way, though. Most of them don't want to ever go past E6. Like, no, I want to stay E6 and below, E6 and below. Get after it. So the Bronze Star with Valor, was that your time with the Ranger Battalion, or was that Recce?
Yeah, that was with Ranger Battalion. We also near Ramadi, there was a portion of the town that had been totally unpatrolled for a significant amount of time, and so we knew that there were a lot of bad guys hanging out there. And so what we had set up in Ramadi at the time, there was also a pretty significant Marine presence, but they were not patrolling. They were just maintaining the base there. And I think probably if we talked to Marines from that era, there was probably a lot of hesitation to unnecessarily patrol because Fallujah was not a great situation the year prior. But what we had set up, the Joint Task Force, was the Marines had organized an overt multi-day, daytime patrol through that portion of Ramadi. You're talking armored vehicles going out door to door, talking to people across the city. And the whole point was to make their presence known and to push Al-Qaeda out of that area. The Joint Task Force, before that operation, went out and set blocking positions on the backside of the area that they were patrolling, because we knew Al-Qaeda was going to be departing and we were going to be there waiting for them. The area that they were in, which turned out to be great, there was a river and there was a bridge that went over. And so basically everyone that the Marines pushed out, if they were leaving that area, if they were nefarious and leaving, they had to go over this bridge. It was the only way out of there, or they would face this entire Marine presence patrol. And so the Joint Task Force, which is primarily the Rangers at the time, we set up near that bridge the day prior to when the Marines started their presence patrol. And it was a really classic ambush location. I mean, it was a road with a dog leg that went up to a bridge, and we didn't know what we were going to get, but we had set out signs on the road that said, road closed, and we had interpreters with us. And the idea was we were going to talk to people as they were leaving and ask them why they were leaving, and potentially run into some bad guys. It was all cornfields on the side of the road too, which was great for, hiding 90 guys in. And as it turns out, when they started their patrol, it almost immediately started flushing out nefarious individuals. And very early in that day, I mean, we set up the night prior, and by the time the sun was coming up, we already had traffic coming out. And very early in the day, when we stopped the vehicles and we sent an interpreter out there to talk to them, we had guys immediately dismount the vehicle with weapons, asking the interpreter what was going on. And we got into a very close range engagement, okay, a couple meters away.
Oh, wow.
And so all of those individuals were eliminated, and we realized this is escalating very quickly. And so we cleared that car off of the road, and we cleared those individuals off the road, and we set our road closure signs back up. And bad guys kept coming, and they kept coming down this road. And so, back to always improving, we realized there's a dogleg in the road. This is a legacy ambush location. Setting your support by fire, everybody get into the cornfields. And so cars of bad guys were coming down this road most of the day, all day long. And we were in the cornfields waiting for them. And when they would, eventually we stopped sending the interpreter out for safety purposes, but they would stop at this road closure. We just put signs out. They could have blown through it, but they would stop. And as if they were overtly carrying weapons and departing an area that was being patrolled, they were considered hostile. And so we were engaging throughout the day. But to your point, when you're, an operator JTAC, you're right there. And so I was with the Joint Task Force CP, and we were right on the side of the road, and there were several cars of bad guys that pulled up. And as soon as one person shoots, everybody shoots. And so within a few meters of our location, we were engaging hostile individuals that were in the car shooting out of the car at us. And so, basically, very short distance, ground level at a vehicle from our perspective, and coming out of the vehicle of their perspective. It was a exciting engagement. But that yielded later a Bronze Star with Valor, and for anyone who's not listening, a Valorous Award, of which there are much higher awards for individuals who are real heroes. That's what I'm describing is very reactionary. Okay, this is not, and I think anyone who was in my situation would have done the same thing. And so I'm not, sitting here declaring that as heroic. Silver Stars, service level crosses, those are really, truly remarkable. But what valorous means is that you engage the enemy when you were engaged. And so there are a lot of really great operators, or a lot of great heroes who have been engaged by the enemy, but maybe they did not have the opportunity to engage back. And so they have been awarded for their combat actions, but it might not include a V on it. It might not include that valorous addition. But that's all the valor means, is that when you are under fire, you directly returned fire and were observed doing it.
Mm-hmm. So that ambush y'all set up that day, was that pretty much the whole day? Did it 5-10 hours?
It was all, until sunset. We were ambushing vehicles. We would eliminate vehicles on the road, and then we would have to push them into the cornfields to get them out of sight, so that other cars would come into the kill zone and not see these vehicles and stop. Wow. The final vehicle of the day, at one point, and all these bad guys are communicating via cell phone, by the way. Mm-hmm. At one point, their cell phones started ringing, and clearly they were unable to answer them. And our interpreter started answering the phones. And they were asking, what is happening down by the river? And the interpreter told them, we're getting into gunfights with the Americans who are doing patrols here. We need reinforcements, okay? And the lead bad guy in the area said to him, I'm going to assemble a large team, and I'm going to send them down there. But it's going to take me a little while, okay? And he said, okay. And he called him back later and said, listen, I've got a team. They are well armed, and I'm putting them in the back of an ambulance, and we're going to turn on the lights and sirens so they can get through the Marine Patrol as a local first responder for medical purposes. And they're actually coming down to the bridge to engage. And I had Marine Corps aviation on station. So it was a Cobra and a UH-1, low altitude flying. And so we heard all this. And the ground commander declared any ambulance that was traveling directly to our location as hostile based on what had happened earlier in that day and the intel we had from the cell phone calls. And sure thing, in a short amount of time, those helicopters said, we have an ambulance with the lights on screaming towards your location. And that was the final vehicle of the day because we shot a Hellfire. The helicopters came at a low altitude, flying behind the ambulance as it was driving, and ripped off a Hellfire right into the back of the ambulance and just split it in half. Wow. And after that, the cat was out of the bag. Like, everybody knew, if you go down by the river, bad things are going to happen. And so, you know, we waited until nighttime in the next field. But that particular day was remarkable because for a lot of guys, and there was a lot of awards and medals that were handed out. There were guys that got silver stars that day, 2 silver stars. Those guys were the real heroes that occurred that day. But everybody was fighting that day. I mean, everybody in every direction was gunfighting all day. And throughout it, I still have pictures of this as well. Like, none of us were really prepared for that. And so we all had like some snacks and a Camelback. And then it turned out that we were in the blazing sun of the Iraqi desert for like an entire period of daytime. And so everybody was sunburnt. Like in the pictures, and you look back at them now, everybody is cherry red from being sunburnt. The lips are like bleeding from being so chapped, totally dehydrated, hungry. But your adrenaline is just so high the entire time. You're not thinking about any of that. But that was, you know, back to formidable experiences. Like, that was kind of my trial by fire. Like, when you have a couple of deployments like that, it just raises your probably confidence to a next level. Your individual belief in yourself is much higher, but also your skill and your planning and your preparation is also much higher. And I believe that after those deployments, I was really in my prime, and that's when I went to Ranger School and then went over to Reconnaissance as well.
Wow. I can't believe I never heard that story about the ambulance. I just figured I would have heard that somewhere through the grapevine or something like that. That's wild. That's crazy. Well, we'll take a quick break here in a little bit, and when we get back, I want to talk about the recce and all the tier 1 stuff you did. I think that's a really cool part. And I mean, even for myself, I don't know much on that recce side of the division. It's definitely kept kind of hush hush. But let's take a quick break and we'll get right back to it.
Yep.
Hey everyone, if you're liking the Howard Show and the episodes, make sure you please like, subscribe, and follow it. Please share it to your social media account. We're going to have merchandise coming out soon, and we're going to be selling some commercial space on the episode. So please help support us, because my videographer, Randy, he needs money. He's got a lot of kids, and he's got a massive drug problem. So please buy the merchandise and like, subscribe, and follow. Thank you. Back from the break. We were just out there checking out the full moon. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's get into the tier 1 stuff, the recce. You know what? I'm just gonna let you talk about it what you can. I really don't know much about it. That's a whole different side of the house that I've only known very few guys go to, and then I don't even hear much from them. So I mean, what can you tell us? I guess kind of the start of it, what it is. I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah. Thank you. So reconnaissance, typically your reconnaissance organizations are comprised of your senior experienced guys, because the nature of reconnaissance requires a lot of autonomy and independence. You're sending very small teams out to do high-risk missions with very little supervision. And so, you know, we talked about like my experience with 3rd Brigade and 3rd ID, and by that time I had 4 combat deployments in 4 years, and so I had a lot of combat experience. I had dropped a lot of bombs, gotten into gunfights, and I earned my place on that reconnaissance team. But the remarkable thing is I still had only a touch of experience compared to all of the Army guys that were on that team. I was the only Air Force guy on a 7-man reconnaissance team. It was 6 Rangers and then me. Those guys had even more experience than I did, whether it was in combat, jumping, free fall, or doing actual reconnaissance. But combined, the amount of experience that all of us had was remarkable. In hindsight now, to have a 7-person team that probably had 50 combined deployments between them, the amount of experience that you have is remarkable. But it's necessary if you're going to do those sorts of high-risk missions. So the legacy mission of that reconnaissance organization is tactical recce. And so you can imagine, your green face reconnaissance where, before an airfield is seized, you send in your reconnaissance organization a week prior. They do a military free fall in from 25,000 feet out of a plane with oxygen on, and they land 30 miles away from the airfield, bury their parachutes, and then spend 2 days walking during the night to get to the airfield. And then they set up operating positions, and they do reconnaissance of the airfield for a week in advance, providing intelligence back to the main organization that is then going to come in and do a full-blown airfield seizure. That's sort of the legacy mission of that reconnaissance organization. And we did that. We did a lot of that. And that sort of stuff is not easy, because every single one of those tasks requires a significant amount of training. Just the first piece, to do a 25,000-foot hey-ho at night, requires hundreds of jumps, months of training, all to get to the point where you can do it. And when you're certified to do it, that level 1 certification, much like flying as a pilot, it's only good for a period of time. And if you don't do it, you lose it. And so we would spend entire training cycles getting ready to do that one jump. And those are exciting. Those are really, in hindsight, intense training events. Nobody would say it at the time because you're all just, too cool with way too much bravado. But when you're standing on the ramp of an aircraft at 25,000 feet at night under oxygen, looking at MVGs, and you can see the curvature of the earth because you're so high, and it's just 7 guys jumping out into absolute total blackness, and the 7 of you are going to fly together all the way to the ground. Like, man, that's something that a lot of people might never experience. But to get to do that for years over and over again was fantastic. It was great. Most of those guys now, I talk to all those guys still. No one at the time would ever admit, I'm going to say this out loud now. Most active duty guys would never say this while they're still active duty. None of us would have admitted at the time that we were scared shitless. But in hindsight, everyone was. Like, I don't care how badass you are, and I don't care how many jumps you have. The amount of things that can go wrong in an operation like that is so huge, and things don't go a little bit wrong when you're jumping out of planes at that altitude. Like, they go really wrong. And so everyone was fucking scared, but no one would say it at the time. It wouldn't have been helpful to say it at the time, but now we can look back at it and go, man, that was nuts. But we did that. We did a lot of that legacy reconnaissance. We did reconnaissance in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. But we also, while I was on that team, spent several deployments attached to what was then known as the Omega mission. And so at that time, there were other government organizations, intelligence organizations in the United States that were running operations in Afghanistan. And so those intelligence organizations were sent into Afghanistan by the United States government to build surrogate forces of Afghanis that were capable of running combat operations against enemy combatants across Afghanistan, primarily the Taliban and other organizations at that time. But because of Title 10 and Title 50 authorities, for those organizations to have access to United States military support and equipment, they had to have United States military personnel on the missions. And so what you had was government intelligence agents, very small numbers of them, single-digit number of agents that were running formations of surrogate Afghans who were, compared to conventional standards, very elite for Afghans, okay? I'm not suggesting that they look like a military special operations organization, but they had basically all the same equipment that we had at the time. The stuff that you and I were running around with, we had formations of surrogate Afghans equipped with the same. And these were great Afghans. Like, these guys were passionate about securing their country and the future of their country, and they were willing to fight for it. And they were paid well, and they were great fighters. But we had intel agents that would develop their intelligence and then lead them onto missions that they would execute. Kill capture missions, reconnaissance missions. But there was a requirement to have a small number of United States military personnel also attached to them so that they had access to things like close air support, which is what the JTAC did, medevac if they took a casualty, which is what our medic did, and they needed a military ground force commander on the scene as well, so that if they got into a gunfight that they could not control, they had the ability for that commander to call for QRF. Without having U.S. military personnel on there, they would not have access to that, and it would just be Afghans fighting Afghans, okay? But you still had U.S. intel agents that would be out there in the middle of it. And so our small reconnaissance team, 7 guys, was attached to these intel organizations in Afghanistan for several deployments. And we would go out and run missions with these surrogate Afghan forces against bad actors across Afghanistan. And it was great.
Wow. That was 3 deployments with that?
We did two deployments doing that. 2 back-to-back deployments, probably 07, 08.
Mm-hmm. Were you dropping a lot during that time with that kind of mission?
We didn't drop a lot. The Afghans got into a lot of gunfights.
Yeah.
Our purpose was not to be the primary fighters there. Mm-hmm. Like, we, especially as a reconnaissance team, you know, you're not a direct action raid force. Although everybody who was on the reconnaissance team had that experience in the past, you had to earn your place on that team. It wasn't what we were training for at that time. But the Afghans were getting into a lot of gunfights. We were not deploying a lot of munitions at that time. But I did deploy, as I mentioned before, on the HLZ. That was when that occurred. Oh. And the reason why we needed to employ there was we were using other government agency helicopters to fly us in and out. And so we were not using United States military helicopters that had armor, they had weapons, they had the ability to defend themselves. These were contract aircraft that were soft skin with no guns. And they would not land on the HLZ if there was any threat at all, which is why we had to employ to save there. But let me bring another mission in. This is a discussion of preparedness. And this ties into business. This ties into all the other stuff that we talk about a lot lately. When I was a young ETAC and JTAC, I had some of the older guys tell me, always carry an H-250. Okay, and an H-250, for anyone who's listening, is an old school military handset. Okay? And I was a young guy and would say, but I've got these new headsets, they're noise canceling, and they would just beat it into me and say, at some point, all the sexy stuff is going to fail. But you can. Okay? You will need the ability to communicate when no one else can. And an H-250 has never failed. People have been carrying those since Vietnam. And so for years, okay, for 9 deployments, I always had an H-250 somewhere at the bottom of a pouch on my body armor that I could have access to. And I had guys give me shit for that over the years, and they're like, dude, really? And I said, listen, if all the old timers are saying the same thing, it must be for a reason. And so eventually, that was probably my 5th deployment by then. And I had been in gunfights and I had dropped bombs. And I also had a brand new, super sexy, in-ear, bone-conducting headset. It was the new hotness. And I had been talking to aircraft all night, probably 8 hours of talking to aircraft nonstop, talking to other ground parties, no communication problems. And then we decided that we needed to clear the HLZ. And so I had set up 2 A-10s for a run-in with an airburst that turned out to be a dud. And then later we came in shooter with guns to eliminate the threat. But I pushed these guys out to the IP and I told them to attack. And they came in and said, one is in from the west, tally visual, looking for clearance. And I said, one cleared hot. One's looking for clearance. I said, one cleared hot. One's off, no clearance. And I said, cleared. Two's coming in looking for clearance. My headset had failed. I had not done anything, but the headset stopped working. And so, and you know, when an aircraft turns off of an attack angle, it generates a lot of sound because he's increasing speed while he climbs out of that. And so that was already giving away the fact that we were about to attack this target. And then on top of that, it was a dud. But in that moment where I had no comms, carrying that handset was finally worth it because I quite literally unplugged the headset, pulled out that old Vietnam era H-250, plugged it on, clipped it onto my helmet, and executed the target, right? And so I still, after that, not only did I continue to carry it, but then I told all the young guys, listen, I know you think I sound like an old guy when I tell you this, but I actually did have to pull this out in combat and use it. And so trust me when I tell you, you should have this on you all the time, okay? There are a lot of things that you can cut weight on, but communications is never one of them, if that's your primary job, right? And that has carried with me years later, like even still today. I'm always thinking about, you know, how are things going to go wrong in this situation, whether it's safety or it's with my family or it's business related, and what can I put in place to have an option when that does occur? You know, what's my proverbial H-250 in this situation? But yeah, so to answer your question, not a ton of dropping at that time, and also not a ton of us gunfighting, but more of the surrogate forces that we were training and leading with them then. Did have one small gunfight with a 7-man team on a recce, separate than the Omega missions. But when you're on a recce team, your mission is not to get into gunfights. And if you find yourself in a gunfight, you are going to immediately break contact and try to exfil the area, which is what we did. And in that particular case, that was my 3rd recce deployment. So we had already done 2 Omega deployments, and we were in Afghanistan, and we were doing area reconnaissance in a part of Afghanistan that had not been patrolled in quite a while. And we went out, and we were going into a village very deliberately where we were going to establish communications with the people that lived there and just ask them if anyone nefarious was living in the area, or asking them to do anything that they shouldn't be doing. Typical presence patrol. But back to preparedness, our plan at the time was, with a very limited number of guys, was we were going to send our sniper and assistant team leader up to a hilltop to overwatch the rest of us that were going to break the tree line and go in and establish communications. And in a short amount of time, these guys were on the back side of the hill climbing it. And without line of sight, we had no comms with them. And before we could break the tree line, somebody in the village saw us. And they all started yelling at each other, clearly that there were people in the tree line. And so we broke the tree line. without having our ATL and our sniper in position. And before we could start talking to anybody, a group of guys got under a truck in the prone and started shooting at us. And so we all immediately returned fire and broke contact back. But it was, a great example of it's not how we had it planned. In our head, our sniper, who was a great shot, was going to be in position. And if we took fire once we broke that tree line, he was going to be there to address any situation. And the ATL could call for fire. It would have been perfect. But we had no comms. And by the time we had exchanged gunfire with these guys in a short distance under this truck and we broke contact back, those guys finally came up on the radio and said, "What's going on? Why is everybody shooting?" And we said, "It's too late, man. You need to get with us," and we're breaking contact back at the base.
That 7-man team, is that the same team that you deploy with every time?
Yeah.
So you guys are tight.
There was a couple of guys that moved in and out, but the core group of those 7 guys, yeah, man, super tight. One of them I do work with now. We're both retired and we work together. We talk together to each other all the time.
That's cool.
And the other guys, like, we talk to each other, but we went through so much shit together in such a short amount of time that even if we don't talk for years, like, we see each other and we absolutely pick up right where we left off, In fact, last year, one of the guys, we were both unmarried and no kids during a lot of that. And now we're both married with kids. And, a couple of years ago, like, he put his house on the market, real estate stuff here, thinking it's going to take me like a month to sell my house because I am getting assigned to a new base. He put it on the market and it sold in the first day and they had to move out a week later. And so he called me. We were at Fort Benning at the time. And he's like, "I don't know what to do. I'm married now and I have 2 kids and I have no house, but I need somewhere to live for like almost a month." And Amber had never met him before. And I said, "Hey, my friend and his wife and his 2 kids are moving in with us for a month. And we had just had 2 babies back to back." And Amber's like, "Do you know him well enough to do this?" I said, "Yeah, I basically know him better than anyone in the world." And so, we had like another family living with us for a short period of time, but I do still talk to all those guys.
That's
and
cool.
I think we will forever, man. We just went through a lot of shit together.
That's a real tight team.
Yep.
To get into that recce team, did you have to go through a pretty tough selection process? Because I'm gonna imagine a lot of people want to get to there.
Yeah.
Because that is a JSOC mission, correct? Yeah.
At the time, back to what I mentioned before, there was not a real firm process of doing that. It's much different now. Now there is an assessment process to do that. That is very significant. And a lot of it is very psychologically oriented to make sure you have the right guys operating in that environment. But at the time, it was mostly based on your records and your combat experience. It's hard to do that now because there are a lot of really talented operators that can serve in those units and positions, but they might not have that combat experience to no fault of their own because the war is just not going on like it was back then. And so for me, it was mostly my records and experience that landed me in that organization.
Wow, that's cool. So those 3 deployments, that's when you went to, when I met you at AST, STTS?
Yep.
So you went there, nothing too exciting over there. You just pushed our stuff in all the time during training. But from there, let's see. I think I ran into you when you made E8. I think you were still in Herbie because I ran into you a few times. And then you put on E9 and then went to Space Force for a few years. I guess, tell me about that process.
I made chief and went down. When you make chief and you go down the group chief and then the command chief path, you typically move out of your career field to lead larger formations. And so I received an assignment out of AFSOC to what was then Air Force Space Command at Peterson Air Force Base then, as a group chief. And very soon after I arrived, which nobody really was accounting for, the Space Force stood up. And the first positions in the Space Force all came from Air Force Space Command. And so anybody who was serving in those positions by proxy was then serving in the Space Force. Now, for the first 18 months of the Space Force, everybody was still an airman because everyone initially in the Space Force came from the Air Force. But over the first 2 years, most everyone in that situation service transferred. They left the Air Force and went into the Space Force, and with it, they took on 2 additional years of active duty service commitment. For me, I was already getting ready to retire, and that was not the path that I was going to go down. And so I did my last 2 years in the Air Force were the first 2 years of the Space Force, and I got to help stand that up, which was super cool.
Yeah.
And initially, there was less than 20 E9s. It was very small, less than 20 E9s in the Space Force, and that many commanders as well. And it's grown substantially since, which it needed to. But that was an exciting time. Certainly was not what I expected. Nobody expected that. But getting to be literally on the ground when a new service is standing up is remarkable because it only happens once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, it was 74 years prior when the last service was stood up, and that was the Air Force. And organizationally, there was a lot of work that was being done to do that. And it was very frustrating for a lot of people as well. But I would remind, we had probably a 400-person organization at the time. I would remind everyone when they would get frustrated, like, there's no continuity book on this. Okay? Unfortunately, the last time this was done was 74 years ago. And nobody kept notes. So you're not going to be able to Google this. For the first time maybe in your life, you are not going to be able to phone a friend on this. You are literally going to have to figure out how to create an entirely new organization and still support the ongoing missions in space as well. But that has proved just in a few years to follow very useful on the business side as well, because certainly if you want to go down the entrepreneurial path, there's not always a smart book on it. There's not always, a continuity book that you can ask somebody else for on how to do it. But elsewhere in the military, or if you work for a company, those are things that you do expect. You expect to get the employee manual. You expect to show up in an organization and get the SOPs. Mm-hmm. But if you're standing up a new service, you're standing up a new business, those don't exist. And it's easy to get frustrated and say, where am I supposed to get these? But it's revelatory for a lot of people when they realize I have to create them, And that's a sort of sink or swim situation because some people thrive in that sort of ambiguity and others don't. But that separates a lot of people who are successful in doing things like standing up new military branches and in business as well.
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
Like, I can't tell you how much that would frustrate me when I was in the military as a young guy in training, but how much I appreciate that in the long run. Because it makes you think. It opens your mind.
Yep.
It makes you think creative.
Yep.
Figure it out.
Yep.
I mean, like when I started my businesses, I really didn't know what I was doing.
Yep.
And that's why I always tell people, I'm like, I hit every pothole on the road, but I got the potholes filled in now.
Yep.
It's kind of smooth. I still feel those bumps a little bit. Every now and then I might hit a pothole I've never seen, but figure it out.
Yep.
And
it's always easy, by the way, this will lead us into business talk too. It's easy for people to, on the outside, to look in and think that things happen fast or things happen easy without understanding all of the work that went into it. And so, standing up the Space Force, it's easy for people to look at that and go like, oh, all you have to do is like come up with a new song, right? But like in reality, man, like you're creating entirely new organizations. You're creating new lines of communications, new lines of authority, you know, from congressional level to boots on the ground. Everything is new. And you're changing all of that without impeding the ability to support the mission the entire time. It's not like we're building this organization that's going to go into effect in the future. It's already in effect. You cannot stop the mission, and you have to build this plane in flight. But it's like that in business too. It's easy for people to look from the outside and think, I want to be where you are, and it seems so easy. But little do they know, if they watched every step along the way, there are a lot of people who would lose interest quickly and say, I want what you have, but I'm not willing to do what you did. You know, that happens in the military and out.
So at Space Force, no space JTAC program, not gonna be dropping up there.
No
guys up there.
No space JTAC, but I will say the first Guardian, that's what they call people in the Space Force now, just graduated Ranger School.
I saw that.
But I was technically the first person assigned to the Space Force with a Ranger tab. And so I like to proclaim that I was the first Space Ranger.
I would say yes.
US.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, a real, like, Whip Battalion, Recce, you know, that was one opportunity I wish I had. I wish I had the opportunity to go to Ranger School. Some guys got a chance to go do it, but the appearance on your blues, having that Ranger tab on your blues,
Yeah.
it stands out.
Yeah.
And then when you get attached to the teams, the ODAs, it's just like an instant credibility tool, having that tab.
It is, it does. But you know what else it does? You remember when you went through the altitude chamber for free fall?
Yeah.
One of the purposes of doing that was to identify what your symptoms of hypoxia are. And they're different for everyone. But if you know what they are, then you're able to identify if you're becoming hypoxic, which is important, because if you don't have the necessary level of blood oxygen, you're at risk of making bad decisions. And if that's in the middle of a high-risk operation, it can create very grave situation. And so what's better is when your teammates know what your symptoms of hypoxia are, and they can point them out to you in advance as well, right? So for me, when I become hypoxic, I lose my color vision almost immediately. That's fairly common. And the very next thing that happens for me, I become giddy like a little schoolgirl. I just start laughing. And that's important, because if I'm on an aircraft at 25,000 feet, which is a pretty mission-focused environment, and I just start giggling for no reason, my teammates are able to point out and say, Kevin's hypoxic right now. He cannot exit the aircraft, okay? Ranger School, at a young age, typically you're a young NCO or junior officer when you go through there, it simulates stress on you by doing things like minimizing your sleep, minimizing food intake. All of these things are specifically designed to create the maximum amount of stress on you, physically, mentally, cognitively, emotionally. And in the middle of all of that, for months, they give you combat scenarios that you have to lead 45 other people through who are equally malnourished, emotionally upset, tired. And what it does is it reveals to you at a young age what sort of leader you are when times get tough. And those things, just like hypoxia symptoms don't change, those leadership characteristics typically don't change either, okay? And so I haven't jumped out of a plane at 25,000 feet in years, but if we did it tonight, my hypoxia symptoms would be the same. Loss of color vision, and I get giddy, okay? My leadership characteristics haven't changed since I went to Ranger School as an E5. And things that I learned there are, I typically excel in ambiguous environments where other people start to shut down. In fact, it charges me up and motivates me. Where some others might say, if I don't know the whole mission, if I don't have all of the information, if I don't have all of the resources I think I'm going to need to be successful, I don't want to do this. Okay? And this is prevalent in business now as well, which has been revelatory to me as a relatively new civilian, right? Less than 2 years since I retired. But those environments charge me up. That's where I get excited. Probably because I had the confidence through my combat experience that I had confidence I was going to come out on top. That when I went to Ranger School and they would say, we're not giving you everything on purpose and we still want you to be successful, I would get excited by that because I thought it was an opportunity to do it my way. And I thought, well, if they're not going to tell me all the information, then I can't be wrong if I do it my way. And if they ask me why I did it this way, no answer is the wrong answer as far as I can tell. And that sort of led to my future approach to leadership as well, even as a chief, even in a Space Force, wherever I was, and now in the business world also.
Yeah. So speaking of business world, you got your master's degree too, right?
Yep.
You did that still active duty?
I did an MBA while I was active duty, yep.
Wow. What was your undergrad in?
My undergrad was in intelligence operations because, as I mentioned, I was doing a lot of intelligence work then. And I thought it would be useful to understand it more intellectually. And so I did my undergrad in intelligence operations.
Wow.
And I then did an MBA while I was active duty as well.
That's pretty amazing. I remember seeing you posting the business that you and the wife created, but it was like the children's learning books or learning videos.
Yep.
And that's still ongoing today?
Yeah. When we, Amber is very creative. My wife, Amber, she's very creative. And I am not as creative, certainly not artistically, but I like building processes and moving things through them. And so when we had both, Amber had also finished her master's degree about the same time that I did. And I was still active duty. She was staying at home with both of our kids. We had back-to-back 2 kids under 2. And she said, I want to, this was 7 years ago. She said, I want to start a children's art YouTube channel. And I'm going to generate money by running ads on it. And so she did. She started a children's drawing channel, coloring channel. And at the time, it went nuts almost immediately. I mean, she is very deliberate in her research and very calculated in what she does, and she did a great job of it. And she created this channel, and in under a year, grew it very rapidly to, at the time, it was a big deal, to over 100,000 subscribers, and she was generating millions of views and running commercials on all of her videos and getting paid by AdSense for doing that. And so she had basically created a massive source of revenue that we then firmed up by creating a business around it. And I had just finished my MBA, and so I built a business around it. We started copywriting all of her material to protect that intellectual property. And what we realized was every one of her videos was producing a page of a future book. And so we took all of her videos and we published those into a series of children's coloring books, and then published them and put them on Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, and they sell in bookstores nationwide. Those pages and the characters on those pages were also repurposed into a line of children's apparel as well. And so for the last several years, Amber runs this children's YouTube channel that the content is repurposed into books that are published and sold nationwide, apparel that is published and sold nationwide as well. And it's an entire ecosystem of children's content. It's growing substantially, and now she has almost 2 million. She just got her gold play button from YouTube this weekend, actually. Almost 2 million subscribers on YouTube now, and it's just continuing to grow rapidly. It's incredible.
I mean, talk about a completely different path from what most people go to out of the military. That's cool. I mean, I've never met anyone that's ever done something like that.
Yeah, and if for people to appreciate, if anyone's watching this, like pick your favorite YouTube channel. Everyone has a couple of them, and look at how many subscribers they have.
Probably the Howard Show.
Yes, that's right. It's not common to have 1 million subscribers, let alone 2 million subscribers. And so it's a really exciting time. But she works hard on it. And, you know, back to what I said earlier, like people often ask her, sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's random people who say, I see what you're doing. I want to do that too. Like, you're able to do this from home. Like, everything you do is right out of your house, and you have 2 million subscribers on YouTube, and you get paid every single month because of the advertisements. I want to do that too. But what they're not seeing is, you know, Amber she has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of YouTube videos up. And each one of those took her hours to edit and film, and years of learning Adobe, the entire Adobe suite, you know, years of learning how the YouTube algorithm works, years of learning how advertisements work, years of researching the market and determining, you know, what is the attention span of a child and how do you keep them to watch a video long enough that you can run an advertisement on it, and then do that 100 million times a day so you get paid. It's easy for people to say, I want to do that too. I want to start a channel too. The content looks so simple, but they're not understanding all of the real work that goes into it, you know.
They never see the years of prep work.
Yep.
They see the rewards.
That's right.
You know, I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but it's the years of prep work that they never saw her do. They just see like, oh, that looks like a good life.
I want that too.
Yeah. She did it. I can do it. I can do it in a week. You know,
that's right.
That's how a lot of people are. But
that's right.
We know that.
But I joke about it. You know, even when I was active duty, like I basically always had 2 jobs or more. Now I have significantly more than that. But like when I was active duty, when I was done going to college, like I had finished my master's, and I was used to waking up at 4 a.m. every day. And also putting the kids to sleep and doing schoolwork at night. When I got done with school, I had all this time, and Amber was raging on YouTube, and that's when I built that business, and I started publishing coloring books. And so, you know, the dichotomy of it is kind of funny to look back on, because I was still deploying and like running contingency operations, like, you know, combat operations overseas. But in my free time, I was publishing children's coloring books, unknown to everyone. I certainly wasn't going to work and like telling all the guys I work with, you know, did you guys want to see the princess castles that I that I published last night? But I was, you know, and we still do that today. You know, Amber handles all the creative side, and I handle all the business side.
What's the name of that business? The YouTube channel?
Colorful Creative Kids Official.
Colorful Creative Kids Official.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you have that. Then you also have the consulting business.
Yep.
What are you doing with that?
I do mostly business development and product development for other companies that are looking to start doing business with the government. I started that while I was still active duty out of necessity, because I was already being contacted by companies while I was active duty asking me to help them develop curriculum or develop products that would be useful to the military. And I had a top secret clearance, I still do, and I was involved in several special access programs at the time. And those, when you're in programs like that, the government is very particular about who you receive money from. And so the recommendation was it's better to own your own company and be paid by your own company than to be directly paid by a company as an individual. And so I started that consulting company while I was still active duty and would invoice clients for the work that I was doing for them and then run payroll on myself as well, which was sort of a second stream of income for myself while I was still active duty, which was nice in addition to Colorful Creative Kids. I have held on to that consultancy and now continue to do work with clients through that as well.
Mm-hmm. And then business number 3, I remember you telling me about this. It's pretty exciting, very needed, but the medical matchmaking, I'll let you explain that.
Yep, that's called MavDoc. And I own that with 2 very talented Ivy League orthopedic surgeons. And we match patients who have unique medical requirements with the best doctors who accept their insurance, have time to see them, and are top rated in their area as well. It is, most people don't realize that we often see medical professionals and doctors that are referred to us by other doctors or insurance companies, but they're not always necessarily the best doctors. And so what we do, our company, MavDoc, is we actually do the research for patients to determine, based on previous patient outcomes, where they went to school, how often they're published, and a variety of other proprietary factors on who the best doctors actually are. And then we find a way to match those patients with them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then business number 4, I love it, Surf Brigade.
That's right.
Like I love what you're doing. Plus, it's right here in our backyard. Yep. I mean, getting together every Saturday morning at 0700 to go surfing.
Yep.
You know, at first you're like, oh man, 0700. I'm up early, doesn't bother me,
Yep.
but there's no better way to start your morning. Like you're driving out to the beach and you see that sun rise up on the Gulf.
That's right.
And you just get in that water. You can't be depressed.
Yep.
It changes everything. It changes your whole mood, how you view the whole day. Because if not, you're going to wake up, have some coffee, sit there, probably watch TV,
Yep.
not move around. But you're out there moving in the ocean. I love it. And I love the surfboards you built. Obviously, the apparel.
Yep.
I mean, I wore this hat. I've been wearing this everywhere.
Yep.
And it's great because it catches people's attention, other veterans. Surf Brigade, what's that? You know, you tell them, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. But
Yep.
I don't want to steal the thunder on that. I want you to talk about it. I'm just a huge supporter of it. I love it. But
Yep.
please tell the audience about Surf Brigade.
Yep. So Surf Brigade is a 501c3 public charity. And as we say, it was founded by veterans for veterans. And, you know, the reason why we chose the name Brigade is it represents an organization, which is what we are, an organization that we can all be a part of. And we use military terminology and references that we are all used to and find familiarity in as well, because it creates a comfortable environment. But the purpose, the mission ultimately of Surf Brigade is to build resilience across the veteran population. And we're starting here on the Emerald Coast. And the way we do that is we build classes of veterans, which you and I are in the inaugural class right now. And we put veterans in a class together, and they make a commitment to each other and the brigade at large to meet every single Saturday morning for several weeks in a row, during which time we have a guided discussion on the top issues that plague the veteran community, and we can talk more about those: purpose, narrative, and community. And after we have a guided discussion, then we all surf together. And to your exact point, you know, we call it surf therapy, but ultimately the purpose is for us to be doing something healthy together that is measurable and repeatable and likely to keep us all communicating together in the future. This is a 6-week program that we're going through right now. We might take it down to 4 in the future, but 3 hours every Saturday for 6 weeks. That's 18 hours that we're going to spend together. If I take a bunch of guys that don't know each other and I tell them, I want you to sit and look at each other and talk to each other about life for 18 hours over the next 6 weeks, it will never happen. Even if I tell them, go to the coffee shop and I'll pay for it. Spend 3 hours at the coffee shop together talking for 3 hours for 6 weeks straight. It won't happen. Guys just won't do it. You have to have a catalyst. You have to be doing something together and have something in common. And what's better is if it's something that you can be learning together and improving on together, and something you can continue doing together in the future as well. And so here where we live in Northwest Florida, surfing is the perfect thing. It's not perfect waves here every single time, but the ocean, being in it, is therapeutic in itself. Surfing together while we're doing it, we can do that for hours and it's not weird, right? If we just sit on the beach and look at each other for 2 hours, it's weird, man. But when we're in the water for 2 hours together, it flies right by.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to talk to each other sometimes when you're catching waves. But it's great. And when you can learn together and impart things on each other, it's a remarkable experience for everybody. And then the idea is that we all keep doing it together into the future.
Yeah, when you said this morning in the water, you're like, let's go up and dry off. I couldn't believe the time like that. It already went. I wasn't even thinking about if I was hungry, hadn't eaten nothing that morning for breakfast. I was just enjoying it.
Well, what you're also not thinking about is, you know, and when I say you, I mean all veterans. When you're surfing, you're not thinking about a lot of other things. We all have challenges. Everybody does. And anybody who pretends like they don't is probably creating additional challenges for themselves by covering them up. Okay? You've heard me say, when we talk about a purpose problem, a narrative and community, when I talk with veterans, and I'm not walking around telling people you have problems and you need to be a part of the program, but I am saying we all have similar problems. I'm inviting you to be a part of this brigade, knowing that this is a healthy community to be a part of when it comes time for you to navigate those problems. But when a veteran says, I don't have those problems, I try to kindly, and I encourage others to kindly help them understand, you might not think you have these problems right now, but you're probably going to at some point. It's better to have an entire brigade behind you when you do experience that, okay? When you realize that your purpose is changing in life post-military, you don't want to be doing that alone. You want to be surrounded by other veterans who can tell you, like, of course your purpose is changing. Everybody here has experienced this. You know, of course the people you work with are not the same as you used to. We've all experienced that also. Of course your narrative is different. You might feel a void in your life, like as if the work you're doing is not as important as what you used to do. We all experience that too. When you have an entire brigade that has already gone through that, it's helpful for you and decreases the risk across your entire life of having that impact you in ways that it doesn't need to. This is a community. And for a lot of veterans post-military, they struggle with figuring out what their new community is. Some veterans don't have that, but we need it. Everybody has to be a part of a community. Everybody has to have a tribe. And whether you love surfing or not, Surf Brigade serves that purpose for the veteran community, certainly in this part of the country.
What I love that you've done with Surf Brigade is you don't have to have any surfing experience.
Yeah.
You don't even have to know how to surf. Don't have to have a surfboard. You come out, you'll get instruction, give you a board, put you on the water, and you'll learn right there.
That's right.
Because even for myself, I surf paddleboard I'd never been on a small board before.
Yeah.
And even me getting on there, I'm dumping off of it, trying to find my balance. I'm like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah.
But getting the instruction from you and other veterans that are there, I mean, it's great. And then you just, to kind of paint the picture for the audience, you literally just go to the beach. Everything's there for you. You just pull up,
Yep.
get with one of the people there, teach you how to surf, get on the board and go.
Yep.
You don't have to pack your surf. So if you don't have a truck, you just have a car, no problem. You don't have to carry a surfboard nowhere. It's a really good program, and thank you for doing it. Seriously, like I it's so needed. It really is. And most guys in our community, they're not gonna want to go talk.
Yeah.
They probably don't even want to get together. If I ask someone, hey, you want to come over and hang out at the house? Yeah, maybe I'm a little busy, but hey, you want to go surf for a couple hours? It gets them out of the house. It's good.
We do. We have developed, and similar to a lot of the other things that we've talked about. This has not happened overnight. This is Surf Brigade has been being put together for over a year, and so it's just become public in to others more recently. But we have developed some wonderful partnerships across the surf industry, and the surf industry is pretty parochial. Like there's a lot of competition. It's a small industry, and so like surf companies don't always work well with other surf companies because they're trying to maintain their little, mostly regional piece of the pie. But the nature of what we're doing for veterans has been really well received across the entire surf industry. And so we've developed a strategic partnership with a surfboard manufacturer, and we manufacture all of our own surfboards in the United States, where we designed it, we put our logo into it, and they ship these boards to us, and they allow us to sell these boards, which we do. You bought one, in fact. And these are also the same boards that everyone in our program uses also. We've developed a partnership with one of the largest leash manufacturers in the United States. They make leashes for all of the big surf companies, and now they make them for Surf Brigade as well. We use those, we sell those also. And then we design all of our own apparel also, which is continuing to grow. This is all screen printed, not just in the US, literally right here in Florida also. And all of the proceeds from this, by the way, the apparel, the surfboards, the leashes, everything, that's what goes right back into continuing operations to allow us to do this into the future also. But it is needed. That's why we're doing this. And, therapy, as you've heard me say, is different for everyone. Not everybody needs therapy. I'm not suggesting that every single person needs therapy in their life. But if somebody does, in regards to the three areas that we focus on, purpose, narrative, and community, the type of therapy to address those is not the same for everybody. Talk therapy doesn't work for everyone. Not everybody wants to talk. There's other types of therapy as well that doesn't work well for everyone. And so we are tapping into the concept of ocean therapy and surf therapy from a perspective of doing something healthy with others who are like-minded and share a similar goal of building a healthy community is therapeutic in itself. And so that's what we do. We get teams of veterans out on the beach. We talk about things out loud about purpose, narrative, and community. And then we spend time surfing together. And we are all, as a result of it, more likely in the future to be more willing to address these things within the team and within the brigade than we would be if we didn't do this together otherwise.
What's the best way? I'm a local resident here. What's the best way they can help support Surf Brigade? Buy apparel, come to the surfing events, donations?
For veterans, get signed up and come through the program and help proliferate the word. But if anybody wants to just help support the cause, certainly buy the apparel, knowing that, and surfboards and leashes, knowing all the proceeds go right back into the program, and then wear it. And, you know, I hear all the time people say, I wore my hat or my shirt out in public and people were asking me about Surf Brigade, and it gave me the opportunity to share the message with them. That is what is most important. You know, when our surfboards are getting surfed in other parts of the country and people see them, and they're cool boards, man. They're black top, black bottom, black fin,
They're very cool.
camouflage leash with the Surf Brigade logo right in the middle. Like it's cool, man. You see it, it stands out. When people see those, they're going to ask, and it will create the opportunity to talk about it. That is what is important. That is how people can help.
Awesome.
Anytime.
You know what? I wasn't going to take a little break, but I want to take a little break because I want to play that Surf Brigade video that actually just came out today.
Yeah.
I'm going to put the website link on there. I want people to
Yeah.
go check it out. But let's take a quick little break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some real estate stuff.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Okay, great. Back from the break, Surf Brigade. The links up there. Really encourage everybody, especially all the real estate community, especially right here in 30A and Destin, get involved in it. You don't have to just give your money. You can literally go buy a hat, buy an awesome shirt,
Yeah.
buy a surfboard, buy a
Yeah, that's
leash,
right.
buy the book. Actually, speaking of books, let's
Yeah.
get into books. So I knew about the surf book because I asked you, I said, did you write this? And you're like, yeah, I wrote this. So let's talk about that. But then you have another book you wrote, and we'll go into that. 2 books total, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell about the surf book.
Because I've published so many children's coloring books, I understand the book publishing process and can publish a book quickly, and I can get it into retail locations quickly. And so when we built Colorful Creative Kids, like we've talked about here, Amber received a lot of requests from people on how they can build a successful YouTube channel. And I received a lot of requests from people on how to build a business, because we did get off to a rapid start with it. And that's very nice. Not every business does that, by the way. We talked about the businesses I own. I've also opened and closed other businesses that never made $1. Okay. That's just the way it goes. But I was receiving so many requests at the time on the mechanical side of how to start a business. Like literally, how do I start an LLC? And despite the fact that there's a lot of resources online on how to do that, people who knew me were asking because I had done it and they saw that we were successful in it. And so I took all of my notes and all of the lessons that we had learned in starting that business, and I put it into a book. And I wrote the book. And because I already had relationships with publishers, and I knew the book publishing process, once I was done writing it, I immediately published it. And now, and still today, it's sold on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Target, Walmart. And all of those books, by the way, we get monthly checks from all of those retailers every time they sell one of those books. And so when Surf Brigade started, I had a couple of veterans tell me, I'm very interested in the concept of surf therapy, but I don't know how to surf, and I don't live by you, so I can't benefit from the surf instruction that you offer. And so I realized this is a case of somebody literally saying, like, I wish I had a book for that. I wish there was a manual for that. And so I literally sat down and wrote Surf Brigade Field Manual 3-01, surf operations and surf therapy. So no one can ever say, there's no book on how to surf. There's no book on what surf therapy is. Quite literally, there is. I wrote the book for it. I published it. You can buy it, and we sell it on our website as well. And so I would tell any veteran who's interested in surfing, it's good. But I would also tell, and I do, anyone in the therapy world, whether it's mental health or clinical psychiatry, it's a great book for them as well to become familiar with what surf therapy is also.
So that's really cool. That's really cool. So on top of all of that, you actually kind of have another new business, real estate.
That's right.
So I was super excited about this. You've kind of seen me do my path in real estate.
Yeah.
We've always kind of stayed in touch, but when you wanted to get your real estate license, I was excited about it because you already have so much real estate experience that you've done personally yourself, house flips.
Yeah.
You even got your own Airbnb out here on 30A.
Yeah.
So you're not coming brand new. You already have a wealth of knowledge. You can guide people. And that's the big thing as a real estate agent. You're really guiding people to make the right decisions. And you already have the experience. You've trial and error. Super happy that you came and joined me at the brokerage. I was like, I gotta have them because I don't get a lot. I mean, to get another operator in the brokerage, most operators don't get into real estate.
Yeah.
And then with your experience and someone, I'm like, I actually like this guy. I want to listen to him. I mean, I was just like, gotta get him in.
Yeah.
So got the real estate license. I think 2-3 months ago. It's pretty recent.
Yep.
License is new. And where do you see yourself going from there? More Airbnbs, focusing on short-term rentals, or just kind of everything, military families?
Yep. I would like to help. Let me back up a little bit. I think that my best opportunity here in real estate, much like we've talked about, how my tactical and combat experience early in my career was beneficial to me later in my military career as a leader. I think that my military leadership, my past experience in real estate, the books, the businesses, all of that comes together and creates the opportunity for me to help lead investors, buyers, sellers through real estate transactions to help them reach whatever their mission is or their goals is, right? Because whether we're selling children's coloring books, surfboards, or houses, or selling people on the idea of a type of therapy that they may benefit from, all of these things have a lot in common. And you have to understand the environment, you have to understand people, understand what their goals are, and help create the transaction that supports that as much as possible. And so I would love to help military families reach their real estate goals, whether that's securing a primary residence when they move into this area. Certainly that happens a lot. This is a really dense military and veteran community that we're in from the entire Emerald Coast. Helping investors find investment properties, which is what I have here on 30A as well. So if people are looking to buy an investment property and they want to appreciate and understand the kind of work that is going to have to go into it to get it ready to rent, I've done that. I can help them understand that.
It's a lot of work.
I've literally been out there, chainsawing trees and assembling furniture. Like, I can help someone understand that stuff doesn't just happen. And then to help them understand, what does the rental market look like here? It's seasonal here where we live. There are different times a year that are going to generate different amounts of money. All of that is very useful experience that can help also. And I have also bought and sold homes while I was in the military and since then as well. And all of that is very useful. And so the goal is through AvantStay to help match with as many of and the right types of investors, buyers, and sellers, and help lead them to their goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely it's so beneficial when you already have that experience because you can speak to it from personal experience. You can speak to it intelligently. You can say, "Hey, my Airbnb over here does $150 a night in the winter, and in the summertime it's doing $400 a night.
That's right.
And this is how many days I'm getting out of it. Here's how much money I made the whole year. Here's my maintenance. Here's what I didn't plan for. I didn't know this was going to happen.
That's right.
You know, like I didn't know there was this county ordinance. I didn't know there was this law. I didn't know this is how taxes.
Yep.
So when you can articulate that from personal experience, hey, I bought this sofa. Well, that sofa, the cushion went flat in 2 months.
Yeah.
I should have spent more money and bought this commercial grade sofa cushion. The pull-out bed broke. So when you can speak with experience, it's huge when it comes to real estate. So.
And picking the battles, you know, going through a real estate transaction can be emotional. And sometimes people get attached to certain parts of the transaction that aren't healthy, you know, and there are perfectly good transactions that can fall apart because somebody becomes too focused on one particular part of it. And so helping everyone stay focused on the end goal and negotiate a healthy amount on both sides to get to where we want to be is really what is necessary. Whether the market is great or not, that always exists. But that, you know, comes from all the things that we've talked about tonight. 23 years in the military of leading people. I've gotten to understand how people work very, very well. I've led 400-person organizations. I have solved other people's problems for decades of my life. And so I understand that typically what people think the problem is, it's not as it appears to them. Sometimes you have to drill down 2 or 3 layers to really get to where the problem is. And even in real estate transactions, that exists as well. But the faster we can get to what the real problem is, the faster we can solve that and stitch together a plan that works for everyone.
Absolutely. Being a JTAC, calm and cool, right? I mean, that's what it is in real estate. Emotions get flared up. There's a lot. Oh, skateboard fell. Okay. Oops. Well,
Edit that out.
no, we'll leave that in there. Oops, sorry about that. Hopefully we got that on camera. Glad that didn't hit you, but I mean, yeah, just being calm and cool and collected because
JTAC trainer right there.
Yeah.
You wanted to test your
That's right.
calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah, my
actually, Riz just texted me. Is that you? Like, yeah, that was sorry. It's always something on the show, right? It's always something in real estate.
That's right.
It's always something, right?
right.
Figure it out.
That's right.
So, I mean, yeah, like a lot of times in real estate, especially when you're dealing with the other side of the party, the other agents, they can just start throwing a lot of things out there and it can burn that deal.
Yep.
But if you just keep it cool, hey, this is what it is. We can solve this. It's not a big deal.
Yep.
It sounds that simple, but a lot of times it gets the other side, the people you're working with can burn that deal.
Yep.
And if you can just kind of instill that confidence in everybody, the deal will go through. Because that's ultimately, that's what both sides want. I want to sell it. I want you to buy it. And you just have to kind of get the emotions out, bring them together, and
That's exactly right.
and close it.
Yep.
So I mean, I'm very excited to see where you go from here.
Same.
Just because you got the experience and just knowing how you are, there's probably going to be a field manual in real estate in a couple of years.
That's right.
On short-term rentals. I mean, you literally could. Airbnbs, investment properties, what to do with the money after you sell the home.
Yeah.
And I know you have experience with that.
Yeah.
And it's not just always a simple, oh, it's just 1031 in this property.
Yeah.
Actually, let's talk about that. You did the house sale.
Yeah.
And what'd you do with the investment?
We bought a townhouse several years ago, beautiful waterfront, slip out back. We kept our boat right outside. It was wonderful. But we did a renovation on the interior while we were living in it. I don't know if I would recommend that to everyone. But after that, we sold it for a pretty substantial profit. And we took all of that money and rolled it into a private equity fund that was used to purchase apartments across Florida and other parts of the country. And so we are percent owners of these apartment complexes, and we get literally checks every single month from the company. And when they either sell those apartments or refinance, which is advertised to be approximately 10 years after the original investment, you get your initial, if there's no loss and they sell it for what they bought it for, and real estate always appreciates, you at least get your initial investment back on top of all of the months of paychecks that you've been getting. And if there's a profit, you get the same percentage of that profit that you are owner in the private equity fund. And so our money is still in there. We get mailbox money every single month, but probably the big return will be when they refinance that whole deal or sell those apartments off, which will be a couple of years from now.
And you probably got a lot of tax benefit out of that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I've done some similar things where it eliminates my taxes, and
Yep.
there's nothing like that mailbox money. Other streams of revenue. That was another thing I was excited about having you come in the real estate brokerage. I always get nervous when agents come to me without other streams of revenue,
Yeah.
because they can start making poor decision choices where they're kind of taking more of their best interest instead of the client's best interest, because it's now coming down to, how am I going to pay my bills? I need to get this house sold. Where if you have other streams of revenue, especially where we're not selling as many houses as we were like in 2021, you're not freaking out because you have other things coming in. So it's really good. But yeah, I'm excited to see where you go with the real estate. I mean, I'm happy to have someone I know that's got my back in it, and I mean, I can't tell you how happy I am to have you in the brokerage. Well, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to cover, anything else you want to say to the audience. I mean,
we've been all over tonight. I think we went from growing up in New Jersey to now a retired real estate agent, among other things. But I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and spend time with you and talk about all these things. And I appreciate what you're doing as well. You know, bringing a lot of awareness to the veteran community for a variety of topics, providing massive support to organizations that are making a difference, and sharing your experience with others too. Like when it comes to real estate, there are a lot of people that will ask and say, you know, I want to be successful also, but you're never dismissive of that. You know, I think you've always been great at being willing to explain to people, like, it doesn't just happen overnight. I'll tell you what it took. Understanding most people will lose interest when you tell them, because they're going to realize real fast that you basically had your nose to the grindstone without a break for years at a time. And a lot of people are incapable of that. But you continue to share that, you know, and that is motivating to a lot of others. And it's probably humbling to a lot of others as well. And so just good job on that. And I'm excited to continue to see future guests on this show who are, you know, have way more better things to share than me.
No, honestly, this has been my favorite episode we've ever done. It's the first time I've ever had another operator come on. So it's great to hear these stories, right? And that was actually something I've been thinking about. There's another podcast that I really like to listen to. It's called Sean Ryan Show. He's a former SEAL,
I'll check it out.
CIA operator, and he said something that kind of really it stuck with me. He said, "We got to document these stories, because if we don't, it's going to be forgotten about."
I do have something else.
Go ahead.
I want to recommend this for everybody out there, especially parents. When I had one of my best friends, who was also a TACP, killed in training a few years ago in a military freefall incident, and that was a major life event. He left behind 6 children, Okay, 3 sons and 3 daughters. And immediately after, his surviving wife asked, which is a great idea, everyone who knew him to start writing down every story they had about him. Okay. The way she did it was she created an email address and just told everyone, if you have a story about him, put it in the email and send it to me. Okay. Because I'm going to print all these out and I'm going to give it to his kids because these stories will fade over time. And it was a great idea, very important. But what I realized through that process was, what if that happened to me? What would I want my kids to know if I wasn't here? And they were both babies at the time. In fact, I'm sorry, we only had one kid at the time, our daughter. She was like a week old when he died. What I did was, and I want to recommend that every parent do this. I bought journals, and I have them on my bookshelf in my office all the time. It's going on volumes now, okay? And I have journals for my son, and I have journals for my daughter. And anytime that there's something I want to impart on them, because they're still young, and I realize they won't remember everything, I write it in their journals. And so they have years. They don't know about these yet. At some point in their life, I will give these journals to them, and it will be volumes, hundreds of pages that I have written to them in my own handwriting of all of the things that I think are important. And some of them are cutesy stuff, when they were kids and they had trouble saying certain words, or they, punched their own tooth out in boxing practice. Like, some of it is little fun family stuff that I just take a couple of seconds, I write the date, and I say, hey, let's never forget this. It was a funny moment, But there are other times where I may write pages of a single entry to my son and my daughter about something that is happening in the world or life or in our family and the importance of it, and explaining it to them my way, so that later on in life they'll look back and have that. My belief is that will help them one day when I'm not here to help them anymore. When they read those journals at 20 years old, it will be helpful to them. But when they reread them at 40 years old, when they reread them the age that I am as I'm making those entries, it will mean different things to them, and it will help them understand where they came from and who they are as an individual more. And so I would, if anybody has kids and they're not doing that, do it. Because the only thing cooler than, getting that information is also when it's literally in your dad's handwriting. Mm-hmm. Like, he wrote that. He signed, he ended it with, love you, Dad. That's important. And so I do that. In the future, those will probably become other things. One of the things that I've done with that, this is a book we haven't talked about. I haven't published this yet. And I'll wrap it up after this. I already took the journal that I realize in writing these, I write to my son and my daughter much differently, because I'm preparing them for different things in the future. I'm preparing my son to be a future knight, as I call it, okay? Because I believe there is a necessary level of masculinity in our society that we will need in the future. We need it now, but we will need it in the future as well. And so I've gone through already the journal entries that I've made for him, and I have broken those out into chapters, and I have expounded on each of those into its own chapter. And I have also hired the same tattoo artist that does all the Surf Brigade stuff. He has also created artwork for each of those chapters as well. And I will publish that into a book called what I call the Squire Guide, because I believe it's necessary to raise our sons as squires if we expect them to be future knights. But if something happens to me, whether, I get hit by a train tomorrow, the idea is my son has all of this to prepare him for the future, and he won't be left wondering as a young man, what am I supposed to do with myself and how am I supposed to fit into society? I'm giving him the book on how to do that. And if I'm not here, I'm giving my wife that book so she knows how to execute the rest of his childhood to prepare him for what we need him to be in the future.
That's amazing. And that's kind of the cool thing about what we're doing right here, right? Like, your kid's going to see this video one day. His kids are going to see it.
That's right.
Their kids are going to see it. 100 years down the road, they can go back and be like, oh, Grandpa Kevin. And they can go see that YouTube video, the podcast, and they can hear the stories. And that was something it kind of came to my mind because I've always kind of done this with like business and real estate. And I was just like, why am I not just bringing my boys on and talking about what we've done in the military and start to document a lot of this? Because how many military stories actually make it to a book or to a movie or even to a podcast? There's very few. How many veterans do we have here on the Emerald Coast with stories? Like, let's get those stories out there and let people know. And then also see like, hey, this is who I was. This is basically kind of who it made me. Made my business who I am today, and here's where I'm going now in the future.
That's right.
So yeah, thank you.
Keep doing it.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Seriously, this was my favorite episode I've ever done.
Yeah, man.
I think it's probably Randy's favorite episode too. I see him over there. Like, I mean, this was good. Like this was a lot of fun. Yeah, and we got to do a lot. I mean, honestly, we probably could have extended this out to like 6 hours if we wanted to get into the details of every little thing. But this was
let's do another one after
we will.
Bunch of real estate has been sold.
Bunch of real estate, and then I think we got some other things coming up in the near future with the state. We'll get more on that later.
That's right.
But like, I think we can do a lot more podcasting and that stuff. But man, that was good. That was a good episode. Thank you so much. Seriously, thank you. Appreciate it. Hey everyone, if you're liking The Howard Show, make sure you please like, subscribe, and follow. Share it to your social media accounts. We're going to be having merchandise coming out soon for you to buy, and we're going to be selling commercial space in the episodes. A portion of the proceeds are going to go to our favorite veteran foundations like Surf Brigade and First There, and it helps me to pay for my videographer to keep this show going and bring on future guests. Thank you.